Damon strode through the door of his penthouse and set Alicia on her feet. He hadn't said a word since they'd left Nightlight, not quite trusting his voice or emotions. The silence between them was deafening, but Alicia didn't have the courage to break it. When she felt his hand on her back, pushing her ahead of him into the living room, she got a clue as to how angry he truly was. Quickly turning around to keep him in sight, she silently watched as he jerked off his coat and tossed it clear across the room. The trench coat landed on the back of the sofa, but Damon had already forgotten about it, choosing instead to stalk his escape artist of a mate. "Damon, wait!" Alicia felt the need to beg as she backed up. "Wait for what?" Damon asked, with a slight tilt of his head. He slowly chased her with a seemingly relaxed gait. "Wait for you to disappear the first moment I turn my back? You have no clue what's lurking in the darkness out there. It's not safe." "I've lived out there all my life. I'm not helpless anymore. You made sure of that when you turned me." Alicia gave him a hard look, but kept retreating, her self-confidence taking a beating as she felt his anger. "It's not like I was running away from you." She swallowed when he started unbuttoning his shirt with quick fingers. Damon's eyes narrowed, watching her as she slid behind the sofa, as if putting it between them would stop him. "Now, where have I seen this before?" he asked with a tilt of his lips. Alicia blanched at the frightened smile he gave her. "I asked you to take me to see him," she pointed out. "And I distinctly remember telling you, no, not yet." The muscles in Damon's jaw jumped as he had a flashback of finding her hugging Micah. The way they had jerked away from each other was exactly why he hadn't wanted her anywhere near the other were-cougar. "Micah was worried. He loves me, Damon." Alicia tried the calm approach, since he was allowing her to keep the sofa between them. For now. She blinked when he was suddenly beside her, on her side of the sofa, softly touching her cheek with his palm. "And you think now is a good time to rub that in my face?" Damon asked, in a deceptively light tone. Alicia's lips parted in retort, but he was suddenly gone. She spun around when she heard the refrigerator door slam shut and saw Damon pouring some of the blood into a glass. She frowned, knowing he wasn't injured. So why was he drinking blood? Taking a couple tentative steps toward him, but not brave enough to enter the kitchen, she asked, "Why are you drinking that?" They both flinched when the glass in his hand shattered. Damon closed his eyes for a second, then snapped them open. "I'm angry, as I'm sure you've noticed, and I was hoping this would give me the strength to hold it in." He raised an eyebrow when Alicia used the speed he had given her to dart past him to the refrigerator. Within seconds, she was putting a full glass of blood in the microwave. Alicia felt a shiver when she turned around and Damon imprisoned her against the counter. He wasn't saying anything, just trapping her there as he bent his head to her neck, not touching. "What are you doing?" she whispered hoarsely. "Testing myself," Damon answered, and he inhaled. "What are you testing?" She leaned her head back, due to the heat he was creating inside of her. Damon pushed himself back so he could see her while he answered. "To see if I can keep my sanity while you smell like another man." He quickly caught the hand she aimed at his face and jerked her forward. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he warned. He released her wrist when the microwave beeped. Alicia moved out of the way so he could get the glass himself. She frowned. "He's my brother. It shouldn't count." "And maybe it wouldn't if you hadn't told him you were not true siblings." The glass shattered in his hand again. "Damn it, I give up!" Damon growled in agitation, looking down at the crimson liquid all over the tile. Tightening his fists at his sides, he brushed past her into the living room. Alicia rubbed her temple, now understanding, at least in Damon's jealous mind, why he thought he had a right to be angry. She hadn't known he was listening when she'd told Micah they weren't siblings. She was trying to make Micah feel better, not make Damon hold a grudge for life. Turning her head, she could see him standing in front of the wall-sized windows. Damon watched her come toward him in the reflection of the glass. He couldn't help the soft smirk that tugged at his lips when she wrapped her arms around him from behind. She was so small she was all but hidden from his view. Gripping one of her wrists, he pulled until she was in front of him with her back pressed against his chest. "How long have you known that the two of you were not brother and sister?" he asked, locking eyes with hers in the reflection. "Only a couple hours before I even told Micah." She snuggled backwards into the security his arms offered. "We talked about it tonight." She felt those arms tighten and quickly elaborated. "The three of us are the only ones who know, besides Mrs. Tully, because she delivered me. We both decided that we don't want anyone else to know." "Wise choice," Damon offered. Alicia bit her bottom lip, wondering how to word it so that Damon would understand. "But I do love him, you know. He's my big brother, and we've always been close. You have to let me see him." "Do I now?" Damon asked curiously. Alicia shook her head, then turned in his arms so she could look up at him. "Listen to me," she smiled softly. "Micah won the first place on my hero list when I was a child because he didn't agree with the rest of the family when they hid me away from the world. He would come to the school all the time and take me away from that prison, sometimes weeks at a time. He allowed me the freedom I craved." Damon didn't trust himself enough to say anything, but just holding her and seeing the love shining in her amethyst eyes was soothing his anger. "And he's a very smart man. He told me that one day I'd find someone who would show me what true love was." Alicia reached up and cupped Damon's cheek. "He was right, wasn't he? You won't lock me away, will you?" Damon pulled her tightly against him, wrapping her in the steel chains of his arms. He gazed out the window that overlooked what was fast becoming a very dangerous place. He had used this penthouse to hide from Michael. Now he was using it to hide Alicia from anything that could harm her. Truth was, after what happened last night, this place was no longer safe enough to hide something so precious. He would have to find a place to call their own so he could ward it against demons. Besides, he was looking forward to fighting with Michael again. "So, to be your hero, I have to let you out of my sight in an unstable city full of demons. That's not fair," Damon chided. "If I didn't have to sneak around, then you'd always know where I am," Alicia said, then held her breath for a moment before continuing. "I don't want to resent anything about you. I love you." Damon sighed softly. "I love you too. That's why I will only agree to your freedom if it comes with conditions." "And those conditions would be?" she asked skeptically. Damon smirked. "I will teach you how to protect yourself when I'm not around to do it for you." "Fighting lessons?" Alicia couldn't help the excitement. "I'm game!" "You should be, because you really suck at fighting." When she tried to hit him, Damon just pinned her arms against him and knocked her feet out from under her. Lowering her to the floor, he felt himself harden as he came down on top of her. "My point is made. he said as he stared down into her eyes. Alicia growled up at him, baring her teeth in an adorable display of defiance. "And there will be no more secrets between us," Damon finished with a hard look. Alicia's growl stopped, and she sent him an alluring smile, wiggling under him. "I want you." Her voice was pure seduction. She waited until he relaxed his grip and started to lower his lips to hers. Quickly, Alicia rolled over, taking him with her. She bounced down hard on his lower belly with a smirk as she stared down at him. "My point is made," she mocked, and wiggled seductively again. "You think so?" Damon lifted them both off the floor and had her pinned to the wall before she could blink. He shoved his legs between hers, bringing it up so it was straddling her thigh. Leaning close to her ear, he sucked her sensitive earlobe between his lips, then whispered, "Two can play at that game." Alicia felt herself melt and rocked against his thigh, wanting more. I like the way you train me." Damon growled at the sexual rush those words induced, and slashed his lips across hers in a sudden frenzy of need. He would give her what she needed, but freedom wasn't on that list. After seeing only a fraction of what had come out of that rift, he'd stalk every move she made, even if she wasn't aware of it. If she thought he was protective before, she didn't have a clue. What Damon was holding back from her was his own fear. Fear that if he let her out of his sight, he would never see her again, alive or dead. He had experienced the pain of losing one woman he cared for in the past due to his and Michael's stupidity. The difference now was Damon more than cared for Alicia. He loved her beyond reason. Pulling back from the kiss, he smirked and picked her up when she tried to follow him. He strolled intently toward the bedroom, but lost his momentum when Alicia's teeth slid across his right nipple, followed by an upward stroke of her warm tongue. Her dainty hand was running across his exposed skin in a gentle caress, teasing him with things to come. Seeing he was thoroughly distracted, Alicia quickly slid from his arms, leaving 4 shallow claw marks across his chest in her wake. They weren't enough to hurt, but they would definitely be enough for him to give her exactly what she wanted. If he caught her. Damon blinked when Alicia suddenly vanished from his sight, and he heard the bedroom door slam shut with a light thud. His eyebrow arched, and he looked down at his chest, watching as the tiny claw marks healed over and vanished. Glancing back at the bedroom door, he narrowed his eyes, hoping she only intended to use that sexually induced fighting tactic with him, not the enemy. Alicia had locked the door and was backing away from it, waiting for Damon to come crashing through it. "Hello, dear. Miss me?" Damon whispered in her ear. Alicia screeched in surprise and rounded on him, taking a few steps away. They stared at each other for a moment before Alicia made a break for the balcony door. Damon smirked and easily caught up with her, wrapping his arms around her waist just as her hand touched the handle. She fought and squirmed against him, making a half-hearted attempt to get away, and Damon felt himself harden with anticipation. His little hellcat liked to be chased and lovingly dominated, and he would give that to her. He pulled her back against his chest and smirked at her sharp gasp when his hand latched onto one of her breasts. "That was a very nice distraction," Damon mused as he nuzzled her neck. He gently bit the place he'd just nuzzled and squeezed her breast softly when she leaned her head back onto his shoulder and groaned. "But I had better be the only one you use that trick on." Alicia couldn't help but giggle breathlessly. "That's fine. I don't think a demon's nipples would taste as good as yours anyway." Damon growled and took hold of the hem of her shirt, lifting it over her head in one smooth movement. Alicia's humor flew out the window when Damon's hand slid up the sides of her shirt and pulled it over her head. She gasped when his hands returned to her breasts, rubbing the lace over her already hard nipples, and arched her back to strengthen the contact. Wanting to feel his hands directly on her skin, she reached up to undo the front clasp of her bra. Damon grabbed her wrists and wrapped them around his neck. "Do not remove your hands," he ordered in a harsh whisper. Alicia whimpered again when the heat of his hands returned to her breasts before slowly traveling down her belly. She moaned loudly when he lifted one of her legs with one hand while the other gently rubbed against the crease of her jeans. He was barely touching her, but the whisper of sensation was enough to nearly make her come right there. Her hips moved with the motion of his hand, physically begging him for more pleasure. Damon abruptly released her leg and opened the front strap of her bra, quickly removing it and throwing it over his shoulder. Alicia's hands joined his in the removal of her jeans, and they were soon forgotten somewhere on the floor. It didn't take long before there was nothing separating them, and Alicia reveled in the feel of his skin against hers. She flinched when the balcony doors suddenly opened, and she was being propelled through them into the cool night air. "Damon, what are you doing?" she demanded. "You wanted to go outside, didn't you?" he asked softly, then lifted her up, sitting her on the thick railing facing him. Alicia grabbed a hold of Damon's wrist when she felt the breeze graze across her nipples in a tantalizing caress. "What if someone sees us?" she asked, looking around at the buildings, and feeling very exposed. "Then they have a very expensive pair of binoculars and deserve to watch," Damon said with a smirk, and let his gaze travel lower down her body. Flipping his hand around so that he was now gripping her wrist, he grabbed the other one so she wouldn't fear falling. "Let's give them one hell of a show." Leaning forward, Damon sucked her nipple into his mouth and pressed her backwards. He was quickly rewarded when she wrapped her legs around his waist in an effort to keep from falling. While her rational mind knew he would never let her fall, it was natural to fear it. Damon slowly kissed his way down her body, stopping to lavish attention on his favorite spots before going lower. He worked his shoulders between her legs and stared heatedly at the gift presented to him. When he pressed his lips against her moist heat, he was rewarded with a humming moan of pleasure. Alicia tossed her head back and cried out with the first stroke of his tongue. She arched back, not caring if she was dangling over the city streets far below her, and opened her thighs further to allow Damon more access. His approving growl was more than enough to nearly send her over the edge. A strong gust of wind blew over them, making her hair almost float around her head, and stimulated her scalp. It was scary, exhilarating, and the thought of being seen by someone started to take on a different light, exciting her beyond anything she'd ever experienced. Angelica and Zachary walked into the castle, completely exhausted. Wren had told them to go home and rest up. Pitt was going to start taking the job of eradicating the escaped demons in shifts so no one would get overtaxed. Neither of them had wanted to leave, but knew Wren was right. This wasn't the type of job to be falling asleep on. It wouldn't get you fired. Just dead. "Home sweet home," Angelica yawned. The pit members who had come back with them agreed with Angelica and split up to different areas of the castle to either rest up or grab some food. Angelica opted to go back up to the laboratory to check on Jason, since they'd left him there unconscious. She smiled, seeing someone had moved him to the sofa against the wall. "He's probably going to sleep for a while," Zachary said from behind her. She traced her fingers through Jason's soft blonde hair, like one would do a child. To save people like him was why she'd started fighting demons in the first place. She only wished he could have stayed innocent instead of finding out the monsters under his bed were real. She had known they were real even as a child. In her opinion, knowing sucked. Her lips curled into a grateful smile, remembering the death of the demon who had tagged Jason for death. She had to admit, Sin was going to come in handy. Too bad he was also psycho. "Get some sleep," Zachary said softly. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we need everyone at their best." Angelica nodded and slipped into her bedroom down the hall. Looking toward the huge bed, then down at herself, she decided a shower was in order to get the demon stench off of her body. Moving silently into her personal bathroom, she turned on the hot water and stripped before turning to the mirror to check for wounds. Not finding any, after all the fighting she'd done in the last couple hours, was a little startling. Again, the image of the man that had shadowed her all night taunted her. Sin. Every time one of the demons would have gotten a hit in, he'd been there to interfere. What disturbed her most was that the times she hadn't seen him, she'd caught herself looking for him. Turning, she stepped into the hot spray and tried to clear her mind of the man who had decided to become her shield against demons. She learned a long time ago to only count on herself so she wouldn't be disappointed. She wasn't going to change that theory now. She scrubbed her body until the skin showed pink, then started on her hair. Angelica couldn't contain the groan as her nails gently scraped along her scalp and closed her eyes in bliss. Had she been paying attention, she would have seen the shadow of a dark figure standing just on the other side of the frosted shower doors. Sin stood perfectly still in the steamy bathroom, watching Angelica do something so simple and gaining pleasure from it. It reminded him of the times he had washed her hair for her, and she'd welcomed his touch. He placed one hand against the glass that separated them as he felt the need to touch her rise within him. To a sun god, the concept of time didn't hold the same meaning as it did to humans. Therefore, usually, they were a patient race. But even the gods had their weaknesses. His was within reaching distance, and very naked. Angelica felt sudden heat blaze to life between her thighs, and closed her eyes, loving the familiar yet seldom sensation. Quickly soaping up her rag again, she ran it back over her breasts, and felt them swell under her touch. Dropping the rag to the shower floor, she soaped up her hands with a good, thick lather, and ran them over her breasts, letting her fingers skim across her nipples one at a time for added sensation. Her lips parted, and her breath quickened. Sin watched one of her hands lower from her breast and slide between her thighs in an attempt to ease the heat he had created in her. His gaze slowly trailed up to where she was biting her lower lip to keep herself from crying out, and inhaled sharply. Sin moved his hand against the glass caressingly, and smiled wickedly when the hand between her legs mimicked his movements. Angelica leaned back against the glass of the shower when her fingers found her favorite pleasure spot and worked it in a circular motion. This wasn't the first time she'd done this by far, and it had been a while, but it was probably the best she had ever felt.
She thought again about one day finding someone to do this with, and Sin's image flashed through her mind's eye. The vision of his dark eyes and long dark hair made the coil of her belly release, and she opened her mouth in a silent scream as she came hard. It took all of her willpower to stay on her feet when she felt the liquid heat slide over her fingers, and her body twitched pleasurably, with many aftershocks. After several minutes, Angelica turned the water off, and Sin vanished the moment she opened the shower door. Grabbing the towel, she wrapped herself up in it, then caught her reflection in the mirror. It wasn't her body that drew her attention, however. It was the handprint on the frosted shower door behind her. Spinning around, she frowned and raised her hand to place it over the print on the door. Her frown deepened, seeing how much bigger it was compared to hers. This place was warded against evil. Or Storm had assured them. Wouldn't that make her peeping Tom on the side of the angels? Backing away from the shower, she decided to worry about it later. Even though she felt much better, only sleep would completely recharge her batteries. After drying and brushing her hair, she returned to the bedroom and pulled her black oversized nightshirt from the dresser, smiling at the name of her favorite rock band on the front. Going to that rock concert had been one of the only normal things she'd done as a teenager, and she cherished the memory. She slipped it on and slowly walked toward the bed, grinning as she pulled back the covers and turned off the lamp. Feeling for her iPod, she turned the volume on low, letting the song Evil Angel fill the silence. Snuggling deep into the soft mattress, she closed her eyes and let it lull her to sleep. Sin stepped from the shadows of the room and approached the bed as he listened to the song. She'd known he was there and trusted him enough to do nothing about it. This was another sign that her true soul was awakening. He had overheard her statement of "home sweet home," echoing Damon's thoughts almost exactly. Damon needed a home for his new mate, Alicia, and Angelica would need the same when he finally reclaimed her. Cain and Tabitha? Again, the same predicament. The women had to be protected and cherished above all others. "Damon," Sin called mentally, as he turned away from the bed and approached the window. "It is time to find a new family home. Ours is beginning to grow." Damon's contemplation was felt through their mental bond before Sin felt himself come to a decision. "I have the perfect place in mind," Damon answered, as he spooned Alicia against him. "I'll look into it tomorrow." Sin's body seemed to dissolve into the breeze coming through the window, only to reappear on the roof. He walked along the battlement that circumvented the inner courtyard of the castle, stopping occasionally to look up at the sky or down at the ocean beyond the property. Feeling an old and familiar presence behind him, Sin turned his head to look over his shoulder. "Long time no see," Storm said quietly. "I'm glad you have found your soulmate." He'd known Sin would come for her. That's why he'd had Zachary protecting her all this time. The corners of Sin's lips curled upward slightly. "I see you have new recruits for your army. Rather young, aren't they?" Storm shrugged. "No younger than your sons when you gave them eternity." "What do you want, time traveler?" His tone was a warning to his mood. "You were there. You saw what came out of the rift," Storm stated. Sin gave him a stoic look. "I care not for your petty wars." Storm knew the truth behind those words. He'd heard the truth from Sin's own lips, though it hadn't happened yet in the sun god's timeline. Sin would one day tell him that the last time he had been at war with anyone, he'd destroyed his own planet. The only reason Sin had shared that secret with him was because they were both gods. But for now, it gave him a better understanding of Sin. Angelica wants to protect the humans because she was raised as one. Many times now, though she doesn't remember her past lives. Your children are also very protective of the innocent, as I know you are, Storm whispered calmly. The fact that Sin had not vanished meant he had agreed to listen. Sin did not correct the Time Walker, nor ask him where he'd gotten his information. A Time Walker could see all outcomes if he chose to look for them. If Storm was worried about the future, then there was a reason for it. What is your prophecy? The humans are always looking for their Garden of Eden, yet they are so vain they do not realize they are within it. It has always been left up to us, the guardians, to cast the serpents out. The humans do not have the power to protect themselves. If we don't help them, then the demons will turn this place into a city of blood. And it will not stop here, Sin concluded in a soft whisper. Storm wiped at the blood that was now leaking in tear-like drops from his eyes. The only reason his head wasn't exploding was because he was talking to another god who would not share the secrets. Some of the demons who climbed out of that rip between dimensions almost destroyed this world during the Dark Ages. We almost lost to them. Storm let the weight of that statement hang between them. I remember, Sin said. Then you also remember the ones that went to the underworld of their own free will to protect the barrier seal and keep the demons from returning, Storm reminded. Sin nodded. The brothers. How could one forget? They have now returned to this world while giving chase to the fleeing demons. Once again, the brothers have willingly given their vow to help rid this world of the demon threat. You and I are quite possibly the only creatures left in this world that can honestly say our power is almost equal to theirs. Would you deny that by hoarding your power for selfish reasons? I could take my family and leave this place to your war, Sin warned. And I can give you a reason to stay, Storm countered. You have 3 children here with you now, but you have many lost across the space of time. I can offer you your missing children. Sin turned his head to look at the Time Walker, but, seeing the blood this conversation was causing, he glanced away. Regain your strength. Then we will retrieve my children. Storm smiled as he disappeared from the roof. Wren walked into his private office and sat down heavily in the chair at his desk. It had been a long night, and just because the sun would be up in a few minutes did not mean it was over. There was a different kind of darkness now. He promised himself that he'd work alone, pay no attention to the other pit members. But as he looked around at the others fighting right along beside him, he could feel the ones who were weakening and the ones who had the strength to stay and fight longer. No one questioned him when he started sending some of them back to the castle. Some even looked thankful. He had sent Hunter to get some of the rest when he'd been injured. The Indian was stubborn and hadn't told anyone of his wound, but Wren could smell the blood. Trevor was almost dead on his feet. Wraiths tend to drain your life force for a while. Luckily, some last-minute reinforcements had arrived, and Wren took his leave, needing to clear his mind of the rage of battle. He could feel everyone's emotions, including the bloodlust for the demons. Now that he was within the castle walls, he concentrated on the powers surrounding him and smiled. Someone among them had the power to block out emotions. If he could figure out which one, he'd shake their hand. That also led him to another conclusion. Not everyone here at the castle had a pit file. But that was all right, neither did he. Looking up at the high ceiling, he felt 5 distinct life forces up on the 3rd floor. He wondered who could be up there, since Storm had told him that floor was locked and off limits. Wren had even looked at the floor plans of the castle to see if there was a hidden door, but found nothing. He wasn't about to waste his time pulling out every book on the shelf, or knocking on every wall in the place to find it either. Hidden doors remained hidden for a reason. If whoever was up there wanted to be left alone, Wren would respect their wishes. The air in the room rippled, and Wren glanced over at Storm, who was now sitting on the edge of the desk. He glared at the Time Walker when he saw the bloody nose Storm was currently trying to stifle. "Telling secrets again, are we?" Wren asked, with a slight growl in his voice. Storm ignored the look and the question, simply sitting there until his nose finally stopped bleeding. Dropping the handkerchief in the garbage can, he looked back up at Wren with a knowing expression on his face, then glanced up at the ceiling thoughtfully. "You're wondering how they got up there, right?" he smirked. "They won't use the front door to come and go. Windows seem better suited to them. Whoever they are, you seem glad they are here." Wren cocked a curious eyebrow. Storm's expression sobered. "Do not underestimate them. They have their reasons for being the way they are. If they wish to interact with the pit teams, they will. But they're not part of the teams." Wren wanted clarification. Storm shook his head. "No, they're not." "All right then." Wren shrugged. "Who are they?" "Legend says they were the original guardians of seals between worlds. Up until last night, they had been in the demon realm protecting the seal from being breached from that side." Wren nodded and leaned back in his chair, deciding he'd stop with the questions, seeing how Storm had already broken his vow of silence recently. His eyes were beginning to burn from lack of sleep, but he knew he wouldn't be able to rest for a while.